Hi guys, tonight we begin in a world that feels almost frozen in time, a world where the air itself seems to hold its breath. You're standing on the edge of a vast cold landscape, where ice stretches farther than you can see, and the sky above feels pale and heavy, like it has been painted in layers of ash and quiet light. Somewhere in the distance, wind moves across frozen ground, brushing over snow that has been there longer than any memory your mind can hold. The world is still, but not lifeless. It is waiting. You can feel that strange sense, like the earth itself is about to change, even if no one around you has words for it yet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and feel free to comment where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. You step forward slowly, your feet pressing into cold ground that crunches softly under every movement. The air bites gently at your skin, not harsh enough to hurt, but enough to remind you that warmth is something fragile here. Around you, the world of the Ice Age stretches in quiet dominance. Thick glaciers still covered northern lands across Europe, Asia, and North America. This is the late Ice Age period, a time historians often describe as the final threshold before the Holocene epoch begins, roughly 12,000 years ago. In simple terms, you are standing at the edge of one of the most important climate shifts in human history. A mainstream historical fact is that the last major ice age did not end in a single moment, but gradually, over thousands of years, as global temperatures slowly rose and ice sheets began to retreat. Yet in this moment, nothing feels gradual, everything feels still, like the world is holding its breath before a long exhale. You notice how light behaves strangely here. It is softer, almost muted, as if the sun itself is filtered through layers of cold air. You pull your clothing tighter around your body, feeling the rough texture of animal hides, carefully stitched and shaped to protect you from temperatures that could drop sharply when the sun fades. Nearby, a small fire burns inside a sheltered hollow. The flames flicker weakly, bending with the wind, as if even fire struggles to survive in this frozen silence. People often imagine Ice Age life as purely harsh and empty, but there is warmth here too, just fragile and carefully maintained. Small groups of humans move through these lands, following animals, rivers, and seasonal patterns. They are not settled in one place. Movement is survival. Every step is part of a rhythm learned over generations. A quirky historical tidbit is that some Ice Age sites show evidence that people decorated their tools and even their clothing with small carved patterns, suggesting that even in extreme survival conditions, there was still space for expression and identity. Beauty did not disappear, even when warmth was scarce. You watch as members of your group adjust quietly around the fire. Someone sharpens a stone tool with slow, practiced movements. Another checks a bundle of supplies wrapped carefully in hide. There is little speaking, but communication does not require words here. Every gesture has meaning. Every pause carries intention. The wind shifts slightly, and you feel it pass over your face like a cold hand. It carries faint sounds from far away, perhaps distant animal movement, or perhaps only the landscape itself shifting under pressure. In this era, large Ice Age mammals still roam these lands. Mammoths, giant deer, and other now extinct creatures move across frozen plains. They are part of the same world you inhabit, unaware that their time is slowly nearing its end. Scholars remain divided on whether these animals disappeared primarily due to climate warming or a combination of human hunting and environmental pressure. The truth, as often happens in deep history, is likely a mixture of many forces acting at once, too complex for a single explanation. You crouch near the fire, feeling the weak warmth on your hands. The contrast between heat and cold is almost overwhelming. It reminds you how delicate survival truly is. A shift in wind, a longer winter, a thinner layer of ice. Any of these could change everything. And yet, life continues here with quiet determination. Above you, the sky begins to darken slightly, even though it is not yet night. Ice-covered landscapes often create their own sense of early dusk, as reflections of snow and cloud blend together. You might wonder how long this world has looked like this. Generations upon generations have known only cold as the default state of Earth. But somewhere deep in the planet's rhythms, change is already beginning. Far beyond what any human eye can see, massive ice sheets are starting to weaken. Melting is slow at first, almost invisible, like a secret the world is keeping to itself. Rivers that were once locked in place begin to move again. Coastlines shift. Entire valleys prepare to reshape. You sit quietly, listening to the fire crackle, unaware that you are living at the edge of transformation, not a sudden one, but a global turning point that will eventually reshape forests, rivers, animals, and human life itself. The Ice Age is not ending today, but it is already loosening its grip. And in this quiet moment, you are right at the centre of that change, even if it still feels like nothing is happening at all. You wake into a colder silence than yesterday, though at first it feels exactly the same. The Ice Age world does not announce its changes with drama. It shifts in small, almost unnoticeable ways, like a slow breath passing through the planet. The ground beneath you is still hard and pale, covered in frost that clings stubbornly to every surface. The air carries a sharpness that enters your lungs and lingers there for a moment before fading. In this late Ice Age period, roughly 12,000 years ago, the world is still dominated by vast ice sheets stretching across northern continents. Much of what is now Europe, Canada, and northern Asia is buried under kilometers of ice. Sea levels are lower than today, exposing land bridges that once connected regions now separated by ocean. Human groups move across these vast open spaces, following survival rather than borders. A mainstream historical fact is that during this time, humans were highly mobile hunter-gatherers, relying on seasonal movement and deep knowledge of animal migration patterns to survive. You feel this mobility in your own body as you prepare to move again, gathering what little you carry, checking tools, and scanning the horizon for signs of direction. The fire from the previous night is now reduced to pale ash, still warm at its core. Someone carefully feeds it small pieces of dry wood, coaxing it back to life. Fire is not just comfort here, it is protection, cooking, and survival itself. Without it, the cold would settle into everything. You step forward with your group, leaving the temporary shelter behind. The land opens in front of you, wide and pale, stretching into a horizon that feels endless. Snow crunches softly beneath your feet, each step sending a small vibration through your legs. The silence around you is not empty. It is full of subtle sound, wind brushing over frozen grass, ice shifting in distant cracks, occasional calls from unseen birds. A quirky historical tidbit is that archaeological evidence suggests some Ice Age groups reuse the same campsites repeatedly across seasons, returning to familiar sheltered areas rather than constantly seeking new ground. Even in a world of movement, memory of place still mattered deeply. You follow the group's path along a shallow valley. The terrain here is slightly easier, protected from the strongest winds. In the distance, faint shapes of large animals appear and disappear against the white landscape. Mammoths move slowly, their massive forms covered in thick fur, adapted perfectly to this cold world. They are not mythical creatures in your eyes. They are part of daily reality, as ordinary as trees or rivers, yet far more powerful. Scholars continue to debate whether Ice Age humans actively hunted these giant animals in large coordinated groups, or whether hunting was more opportunistic, depending on circumstance and survival pressure. What is clear is that humans and megafauna shared the same fragile ecosystem, each influencing the other in ways that are still being uncovered. You adjust your grip on a stone tool as you walk. It is simple, shaped by careful striking of flint or similar rock. Yet in your hands, it becomes an extension of thought, an extension of survival. Every object you carry has purpose. Nothing is wasted in a world where resources are uncertain. The wind strengthens slightly, carrying fine particles of snow that brush against your face like cold dust. You lower your head instinctively. Around you, others do the same. The group moves as one organism, responding to the environment without needing spoken instruction. Occasionally, you pass signs of earlier human presence. A scatter of broken tools, charred remains of an old fire pit. These traces remind you that you are not the only ones moving through this vast frozen world. Others have been here, lived here, survived here, and continued forward. A mainstream historical fact is that Ice Age humans left behind thousands of such sites across Europe and Asia, giving modern archaeology a fragmented but rich record of their lives. Each site is like a quiet echo of a moment that once felt urgent and real. You begin to notice subtle differences in the landscape compared to earlier generations. The ice does not feel as absolute as it once was described in stories passed down within your group. In some valleys, soil appears slightly softer. In sheltered areas, small patches of vegetation cling to life longer than expected. These are not dramatic changes, but they are real enough to notice. Something in the world is shifting. Scholars remain divided on whether early humans were aware of long-term climate change as a concept, or whether they simply interpreted these shifts as seasonal variations or spiritual cycles. Either way, the experience of change was lived, not measured. You pause briefly at a higher ridge. From here, the world opens wide again. You can see layers of frozen land stretching into distance, broken by dark lines of river ice and faint silhouettes of movement. It is both beautiful and severe, a landscape that demands respect without explanation. And as you stand there for a moment, you realize something quietly unsettling. The cold is still present, still powerful, but it no longer feels entirely stable. It feels like something in the rhythm of the world is beginning to loosen. Not enough to name, but enough to feel. You continue walking as the land slowly shifts around you, though nothing changes quickly enough for the eye to fully trust it. The Ice Age world still feels solid, still anchored in cold permanence, but there are moments now where that certainty seems to soften. A patch of snow melts slightly faster in a sheltered hollow. A stream flows where earlier seasons it may have been locked in ice. Small things, quiet things. The kind of details that only reveal themselves when you have lived long enough in the same fragile environment. In this late Ice Age period, human survival depends entirely on deep observation of nature. You do not measure time with tools or numbers. You read it through animal behavior, wind direction, plant cycles, and the texture of frozen ground beneath your feet. The world itself becomes your calendar. A mainstream historical fact is that Ice Age humans followed highly seasonal migration routes, tracking herds of animals across vast distances as they moved between feeding grounds. You feel that rhythm in your steps as your group continues forward, not wandering randomly, but following patterns shaped by generations of experience. The cold air presses gently against your skin, and your breath appears briefly in front of you before dissolving into nothing. You tighten the hide layers around your body. These materials, carefully prepared from animal skins, are your only barrier against the environment. Every stitch carries meaning. Every piece of clothing represents time, effort, and survival knowledge passed down quietly from one person to another. A quirky historical tidbit is that archaeologists have found evidence of intricate beadwork and ornamentation on Ice Age clothing, suggesting that identity and social expression were still important even in harsh survival conditions. Even here, in a world dominated by ice and hunger, people still found ways to express who they were. You glance at the people walking beside you. Their faces are calm but focused. There is no sense of rush, only continuity. Someone adjusts a strap on a bundle of tools. Another checks the direction of the wind, turning their heads slightly, as if listening to the landscape itself. The terrain begins to change as you move deeper into a valley. The wind becomes less aggressive here. Snow lies in uneven layers, some parts compacted by past movement, others soft and untouched. You step carefully, feeling the ground respond differently beneath each footstep. Scholars remain divided on whether Ice Age humans had structured leadership roles within small groups, or whether decisions were made collectively through shared understanding. What is clear is that cooperation was essential. No single person could survive alone in this environment for long. You notice animal tracks in the snow, large prints, spaced far apart, indicating slow movement, possibly mammoth or large deer species. Your group pauses briefly, observing silently. There is no need for words. Everyone understands the importance of reading signs in the land. A direction change here could mean access to food, or it could mean danger if a predator is nearby. You continue forward after a short pause. The silence returns, deep and steady, occasionally broken by distant cracking ice or the soft rustle of wind moving through frozen vegetation. The world feels both empty and full at the same time, as if life is scattered thinly across an immense canvas. A mainstream historical fact is that during the late Ice Age, much of Earth's water was locked in glaciers, which caused sea levels to be significantly lower than today, exposing vast stretches of land that are now underwater. You're walking across terrain that, in another time, might not even exist as land. This realization is not something spoken aloud, but it exists in the background of awareness. The world you know is not fixed, it is temporary, shaped by forces far larger than any single human life. As you move further, you notice something subtle in the vegetation. Small clusters of hardy plants begin to appear more frequently in sheltered pockets. They are not lush forests, not yet, but they are signs of persistence. Life refusing to disappear completely. The Ice Age is still present, but it is no longer absolute. A gentle thought passes through your mind. If the world is changing, then survival must also change with it. The methods that worked before may not always be enough in what comes next. Scholars continue to debate whether early humans consciously adapted to long-term environmental change, or whether adaptation occurred gradually without awareness of the broader pattern. Either way, humans did adapt, and that adaptation is what will eventually reshape everything. You reach a slight rise in the terrain and pause again. The view opens outward. Far in the distance, pale light reflects off ice sheets that still dominate the horizon, but between you and that frozen expanse, there are more signs of variation now. Valleys that seem less rigid, areas where water moves more freely, places where the world is slowly learning to breathe again. You stand there quietly, feeling the wind pass over your face. It is still cold, still demanding, but something about it feels different now, less absolute, less eternal. And as you continue your journey forward, you begin to sense it more clearly. The Ice Age is not simply a static world anymore. It is becoming something else, slowly, almost imperceptibly, like a memory changing shape while you're still inside it. The fire has become the center of your world now, not because it is large or powerful, but because everything around it is so fragile. You sit close enough to feel its warmth on your face, yet far enough to remain aware of the cold that waits just beyond its reach. The Ice Age night settles in slowly, like a heavy blanket laid across an endless landscape. In this late Ice Age world, roughly 12,000 years ago, human life is organized around movement, resources, and the constant negotiation between warmth and exposure. There are no permanent settlements in the way future civilizations will understand them. Instead, there are temporary shelters, rebuilt again and again as people follow animals and seasonal shifts. A well-established archaeological understanding is that fire was not only used for cooking and warmth, but also for protection against predators and for shaping social life around shared spaces. You feel this truth as you sit among others, the circle of firelight drawing everyone into a quiet, shared rhythm. A lesser-known observation from excavation sites is that some hearths were maintained in the same locations for repeated generations, suggesting that certain places carried a kind of memory, even without written records. You look at the embers and wonder how many nights have passed in similar silence, in similar circles of light. The group around you is calm, but not idle. Hands are always moving, tools are checked, hides are repaired. Simple tasks carry enormous weight here. Every action is connected to survival, even the smallest gesture. You notice how people speak less than modern life would expect, but communicate more through movement, glance, and timing. The wind outside shifts again, brushing over the shelter you have built from bone, wood, and layered hides. It presses against the structure, testing it, as if the world itself is constantly checking whether you are ready to endure it. In this era, human survival depends heavily on reading the environment with precision. Animal tracks, cloud movement, and even the behavior of birds become essential indicators of change. You have learned to interpret silence as much as sound. A point often discussed among researchers is whether Ice Age humans possessed a sense of long-term, environmental planning, or whether survival decisions were always short-term and reactive. Standing here, watching the fire flicker, it feels less like planning and more like deep familiarity with uncertainty itself. You lean slightly closer to the warmth. The heat touches your skin unevenly, warm on one side, cold on the other. That contrast becomes almost comforting, reminding you that balance in this world is never stable, only temporary. Outside the shelter, the land stretches into darkness. Snow reflects faint starlight, giving the world a soft glow that makes everything feel distant and unreal. Somewhere beyond the hills, large animals continue their slow migration, following paths older than human memory. You think about how much of this landscape is invisible to you right now, not because it is hidden, but because it is too large to fully comprehend. Valleys, rivers, frozen plains, all extending far beyond what a single group can ever truly know. Another interesting archaeological note is that some Ice Age sites show repeated use of specific migration corridors over thousands of years, suggesting that knowledge of land routes was preserved with remarkable consistency across generations. You are, in a sense, walking paths already shaped by countless unseen predecessors. The fire pops softly. A small spark rises and disappears into the cold air above. You watch it briefly, then let your gaze drift back to the faces around you. There is no urgency here, only endurance. The kind of endurance that does not announce itself but simply continues hour after hour, night after night, outside. The Ice Age world remains vast and unchanged in appearance, but within it, something subtle is continuing to shift, not enough to name, not enough to fully explain, just enough to sense, like a pressure in the air before weather turns. You feel it again, that quiet awareness, as if the planet is slowly adjusting its rhythm beneath everything you know, and without realizing it, you are already part of that transition. The night deepens around your small circle of firelight, and the world beyond it feels almost erased. Only a few meters away, everything dissolves into darkness and drifting snow. The Ice Age does not offer clear boundaries between safety and danger. It simply shifts from one state to another without warning. In this period of the late Pleistocene, human groups depend on highly flexible survival strategies shaped by thousands of years of adaptation. There are no fixed homes in the way later societies will build them. Instead, there are seasonal camps, temporary shelters, and familiar routes that are revisited again and again as animals migrate and resources shift. A widely accepted archaeological interpretation is that Ice Age communities were deeply knowledgeable about animal behavior, using seasonal patterns to determine movement across vast landscapes. You see this knowledge reflected in the way your group prepares quietly even at night, always ready to move if needed, even while resting. A lesser-known detail from excavation studies is that some sites contain carefully arranged stone tools that appear to have been deliberately stored rather than discarded, suggesting early forms of resource planning. You glance at the tools near the fire and notice how each object has a place. As if order itself is a form of protection, the fire crackles softly, sending brief waves of warmth across your hands. The heat is uneven, sometimes strong, sometimes fading, as if even fire must struggle to survive in this environment. You shift slightly closer, feeling the difference between exposed skin and the protected layers of animal hide you wear. Around you, Gaston, people begin to settle into stillness. Not sleep yet, but a quiet resting state where movement slows and attention softens. Even in moments of rest, awareness never fully disappears. The Ice Age does not allow complete vulnerability. Outside the shelter, wind passes over frozen ground in long, continuous flows. Snow drifts accumulate slowly against uneven surfaces. Somewhere in the distance, faint sounds of movement suggest that life continues beyond human perception. Perhaps migrating animals, perhaps shifting ice. The world never becomes truly silent. A recurring academic discussion concerns whether Ice Age humans had symbolic or spiritual interpretations of natural forces such as fire, weather, and animal migration. While evidence is indirect, many archaeological findings hint that meaning was often attached to natural phenomena, even without written language. You look at the fire again and wonder what it represents to those sitting beside you. Warmth, survival, or something more. Your fingers flex slightly, still feeling the lingering cold despite the fire. This contrast becomes a constant companion in your life. Heat and cold, safety and exposure, movement and stillness. Everything exists in balance, never fully stable. A small observation from prehistoric sites is that repeated use of fire pits often created layers of ash and charcoal that accumulated over generations, forming a kind of environmental memory beneath the ground. You imagine that even this place you sit in may carry echoes of past nights, long before your arrival. You glance toward the entrance of the shelter. Beyond it lies a vast landscape shaped by ice, wind, and slow geological time. The horizon is invisible now, swallowed by darkness. But you know it is there. You have walked it. You have felt it under your feet. It is both familiar and endless. The group remains quiet. No unnecessary words are spoken. Communication is reduced to presence, to shared understanding, to small movements that signal awareness. In this world, silence is not emptiness, it is efficiency. A commonly cited scientific view is that the late Ice Age environment required extremely high levels of cooperation for survival, especially in colder regions where resources were scarce and unpredictable. You can feel that truth in the way everyone subtly adjusts their position around the fire, ensuring no one is left outside its warmth. A quieter archaeological insight suggests that even in harsh environments, humans maintained social bonds through shared rituals around firelight, food preparation, and storytelling. You cannot hear stories now, but you sense their shape in the rhythm of breathing and stillness around you. The fire dims slightly, then strengthens again as fresh fuel catches. That small change feels significant in the silence. You watch it carefully, as if it might reveal something about the world itself. Outside, the Ice Age continues its slow transformation. Ice sheets still dominate vast regions, but beneath that apparent stability, gradual warming is already beginning to alter patterns of water, vegetation, and animal movement. None of this is obvious in a single night. Yet over time, these subtle shifts will become the foundation of a completely different world. For now, though, you remain here, in this fragile pocket of warmth, suspended between what the world has always been and what it's quietly becoming. And that quiet in-between feeling settles deeper than sleep. The fire has lowered into a calmer glow, no longer roaring against the night but breathing gently instead. You notice how the flames seem to settle into their own rhythm, like a living presence that matches the slow pulse of the sleeping world around you. The Ice Age darkness presses close, but inside this small circle of light, everything feels contained, almost protected. By this stage of the late Ice Age, human survival is tightly interwoven with environmental reading skills that are almost instinctive. Temperature shifts, wind direction, and animal movement are not abstract ideas. They are daily knowledge. You do not think about them in words. You feel them. A widely accepted archaeological understanding is that Ice Age communities organized their movement in response to seasonal cycles of grazing herds, especially large herbivores that shape the food chain. You imagine this knowledge passing quietly between individuals, not through instruction, but through observation and repetition over long periods of time. A less commonly discussed detail from prehistoric site analysis is that some hearth areas contain repeated evidence of controlled ash removal, suggesting that people intentionally maintained cleanliness and structure around their living spaces. Even in a harsh world, order still mattered. You glance at the fire pit and see how carefully it has been tended, as if it is more than just a source of heat. The air outside the shelter shifts slightly. A cold draft slips through the entrance and touches your skin before fading again. You pull your clothing closer around your body, feeling the weight of animal hides that have been shaped and softened through use. These materials are not just protection. They are a second skin, a boundary between survival and exposure. Around you, others remain quiet. Some are resting, others remain half aware, listening to the environment even in stillness. Sleep in this world is never completely deep. There is always a part of awareness that stays awake, just in case, outside. The Ice Age landscape continues unchanged in appearance, though not in motion. Snow drifts slowly across uneven ground. Ice formations shift subtly under pressure. Far away, unseen animal movement continues its slow migration across frozen terrain. A point often debated among researchers is whether Ice Age humans experienced a structured concept of time similar to modern seasonal calendars, or whether their awareness of time was entirely grounded in immediate environmental cues. You do not think in calendars here. You think in patterns. Return of animals, return of cold, return of light. A small but fascinating archaeological observation is that some Ice Age groups created symbolic markings on bone or stone objects that may have recorded environmental cycles or significant events, though their exact meaning remains uncertain. You look at the tools near you and wonder if any pattern of memory is hidden within their shapes. The fire shifts again, a small collapse of glowing embers followed by a brief flare. That momentary change draws your attention more than expected. In this world, even small variations carry meaning. Nothing is too minor to notice. You listen to the quiet sounds inside the shelter. soft breathing, occasional movement, the faint crackle of burning wood. These sounds become the background of your awareness, steady and grounding. A widely supported scientific perspective is that human groups during this period relied heavily on cooperative survival networks, often sharing resources and knowledge across extended regions rather than isolated camps. You feel this connection indirectly, as if your group is part of a larger invisible web of other groups moving across the same vast landscape. A more interpretive archaeological suggestion is that firelight gatherings may have served not only practical purposes, but also social reinforcement, strengthening group identity through shared presence in darkness. You do not see rituals clearly here, but you feel the importance of simply being together in this small illuminated space. Outside, the wind rises slightly, brushing across the entrance again. The shelter responds with a soft shift of materials. You notice how carefully it has been constructed, using whatever the environment provides. Nothing is permanent, yet everything is adapted. You think briefly about how different this world is from what it will become. In the future, people will live in permanent structures, track time precisely, and move less in response to nature. But here, everything is immediate, physical, and closely tied to survival. Still, there is a strange comfort in that simplicity. You do not have to interpret distant systems or abstract rules. You only have to listen, observe, and respond. The fire dims once more, then steadies. Its glow reflects softly on nearby faces, creating brief patterns of light and shadow that shift with every small movement. And in that quiet balance between darkness and warmth, the night continues without urgency, carrying you gently forward through the last deep moments of Ice Age stillness. The night outside your shelter has deepened into a kind of silence that feels almost physical, as if the cold itself has weight. Inside, the fire remains the only true boundary between life and the vast Ice Age world pressing in from all sides. You sit close enough to feel its warmth, yet distant enough to remain aware of how fragile that warmth really is. During this late Ice Age period, human survival is shaped by constant adaptation to environmental instability. Glaciers still dominate large portions of the northern hemisphere, but they are no longer entirely unchanging. Subtle warming trends are beginning to influence water flow, vegetation, and animal movement patterns across different regions. A well-supported archaeological view suggests that Ice Age communities developed highly flexible mobility systems, allowing them to follow shifting resources across enormous territories. You imagine this flexibility in your own life, where staying in one place is never a guarantee, and movement is always part of survival logic. A lesser remarked finding from excavation records is that repeated habitation layers in certain sites show evidence of careful spatial organization, with designated areas for tools, fire, and waste. Even without permanent architecture, space itself was structured with intention. You look around your temporary shelter and notice how naturally these zones form. Even without planning, the fire crackles softly, sending small sparks upward that vanish almost instantly into the cold air above. Each spark feels like a brief moment of defiance against the darkness. You watch them disappear, wondering how something so small can feel so meaningful in a world so large. Around you, the group remains in a state of quiet rest, not fully asleep, not fully awake. This half-awareness is a form of protection. In a world where predators and weather shifts are always possible, complete vulnerability is rare. Outside, wind moves steadily across frozen ground. It bends around small rises in the terrain, creating invisible currents that you can sense more than see. Snowdrift accumulate in uneven patterns, reshaping the landscape slowly, almost imperceptibly. A frequently discussed interpretation in paleoanthropology is whether Ice Age humans possessed an early form of seasonal forecasting, based purely on accumulated experience rather than formal science. You feel this idea in your own instincts, as you interpret subtle environmental cues without conscious calculation. A quieter insight drawn from site analysis is that some groups appear to have returned to specific landscape features across generations, suggesting a deep memory of place embedded within cultural survival strategies. You think about this as you recall familiar routes, valleys, and sheltered areas that feel almost inherited rather than learned. The fire shifts again, settling lower as fuel is consumed. You add a small piece of material to it, watching how carefully it catches. Fire here is never automatic. It is managed, tended, and respected. Without attention, it disappears quickly, and with it, warmth and safety vanish. The surrounding darkness feels complete beyond the shelter walls. No artificial light exists beyond this point, only natural illumination from fire and faint starlight reflected off snow. The world beyond your immediate space is mostly unknown in this moment, yet still very present. A widely accepted scientific reconstruction of this era describes human groups as highly cooperative networks, where survival depended on shared knowledge, resource exchange, and collective movement strategies. You sense this cooperation not as theory, but as lived reality in the quiet coordination of your group. A more interpretive academic perspective suggests that fire-centered gatherings may have played a role in strengthening social cohesion, reinforcing trust and shared identity in environments where isolation could be dangerous. You notice how even silence feels shared here, not individual. Occasionally, the wind shifts and brings a faint scent of distant ice and mineral coldness. It reminds you that beyond this small circle of warmth lies a vast world, still dominated by frozen structures that have existed far longer than any human presence. You adjust your position slightly, feeling the uneven ground beneath you. Every surface here is temporary, shaped by weather and time rather than construction. Nothing stays fixed. Everything is in motion. Even when it appears still, the fire settles into a steady glow again, and the group remains quiet. There is no urgency in this moment, only endurance stretched across time, and in that endurance, something subtle continues to unfold in the world outside, something that has not yet fully revealed itself. You do not name it. You only feel it, like pressure in the air before a change that has not yet arrived. The fire has settled into a low, steady pulse, like a quiet heartbeat in the center of the frozen world. You can feel its warmth most clearly when you lean slightly forward, and then immediately notice the cold waiting just a few inches away. That contrast never disappears here. It defines everything in this late Ice Age landscape. Human life is still deeply tied to movement and environmental awareness. Large ice sheets continue to dominate northern regions, but the world is no longer completely locked in place. Subtle warming trends are slowly influencing ecosystems, even if no one living here would describe it in those terms. A widely accepted reconstruction of prehistoric life suggests that human groups followed predictable migratory routes shaped by seasonal animal movements, especially herds that shifted between grazing areas depending on temperature and vegetation. You think about how your group moves almost instinctively, as if the land itself is guiding you forward. A lesser-known archaeological detail is that some Ice Age camps show signs of repeated short-term occupation, with tools and hearths indicating return visits rather than continuous settlement. It suggests a rhythm of coming and going, a relationship with land that is temporary but familiar. You glance at your surroundings and wonder how many times this exact spot has been used before your arrival. Outside the shelter, the wind carries a slow, constant motion across the frozen ground. It does not rush, it simply persists. Snow shifts in thin layers, forming soft ridges that slowly reshape the landscape. The Ice Age world is not static. It is constantly being rewritten by forces too slow to notice in a single moment. You adjust your position near the fire, feeling the warmth spread unevenly across your body. The animal hides you where carry a faint scent of smoke and earth, absorbed over time from repeated exposure to fire and weather. These materials are not just protection. They are part of your identity in this environment. Around you, the group remains quiet and still. Even in rest, there is awareness. Someone opens their eyes briefly, checks the fire, then settles again. This kind of vigilance is normal here. The world does not allow complete relaxation. A commonly discussed scientific interpretation is that Ice Age humans developed highly refined observational skills, allowing them to detect environmental changes at very early stages, often before they became obvious in the landscape. You experience this as a quiet sensitivity to everything around you, from wind direction to animal absence. A more subtle insight from archaeological studies is that spatial organization within camps often reflects social structure, with certain areas consistently used for specific activities, suggesting early forms of shared behavioral planning. You notice this naturally forming in your own group, even without instruction. The fire shifts slightly, a small collapse of embers followed by a gentle flare. You watch it carefully, as if it might signal something beyond itself. Fire is never just fire here. It is time, safety, and attention made visible. Beyond the shelter, the darkness is complete. Yet it is not empty. It is filled with movement you cannot fully perceive, ice shifting under pressure, animals moving across long distances, wind shaping terrain over invisible timelines. The world continues whether you observe it or not. A well-supported anthropological understanding is that survival during this era depended heavily on knowledge transmission within groups, often through repeated practice rather than formal teaching. You think about how everything you know has been learned through observation, imitation, and repetition, not instruction. A quieter academic suggestion proposes that firelight gatherings may have functioned as both practical and psychological anchors, providing a stable point of focus in an otherwise unpredictable environment. You feel that stability now, sitting within the soft glow that separates your group from the vast unknown outside. Occasionally, a faint sound reaches you from the distance, perhaps ice shifting or wind passing through a narrow valley. It is impossible to identify with certainty. In this world, ambiguity is constant. You pull your hands closer to the fire again. The warmth is not strong, but it is reliable in its fragility. That is enough. Time passes slowly here, not measured but experienced. There are no markers, no divisions, only continuity. The Ice Age does not hurry, and neither does life within it. And as you remain in this quiet space between warmth and darkness, you begin to sense that the world outside is still changing, even if it refuses to reveal how. The fire is now reduced to a concentrated cluster of glowing embers, holding on to heat with quiet determination. You notice how the light changes as it weakens, becoming softer, more orange than yellow, as if the flame is slowly turning inward. The Ice Age night feels even larger now, as though the darkness has grown in response to the fading fire. During this late stage of the Ice Age, environments across the northern hemisphere are beginning to show early signs of instability. Glacial systems are still massive and dominant, but they are no longer entirely static. Melt patterns begin to appear in certain regions during warmer seasons, subtly altering river paths and seasonal availability of resources. A widely supported archaeological interpretation is that human mobility during this period was closely tied to following migrating herds across increasingly variable landscapes. You imagine your group reading the land like a living map, where every change in animal behavior hints at larger environmental shifts, A lesser noticed detail from excavation evidence is that some prehistoric sites show layers of repeated occupation separated by long gaps, suggesting seasonal return patterns that may have stretched across generations. You look at the ground beneath you and wonder how many unseen cycles of arrival and departure have passed here before your own. The wind outside becomes slightly more noticeable, slipping through small gaps in the shelter and brushing against your skin before disappearing again. It carries the cold scent of open land, distant ice, and slow-moving air masses that define this era. You pull your clothing tighter. The animal hides feel heavier now, slightly damp from repeated exposure to cold air and warmth from the fire. They are not perfect protection, but they are essential. In this world, imperfection is part of survival. Around you, the group remains still. Some have closed their eyes, resting lightly. Others continue to sit in quiet awareness, listening to the environment beyond the shelter. Sleep is never fully complete here. A part of the mind always remains alert. A commonly accepted scientific perspective is that Ice Age humans possessed highly developed sensory awareness, allowing them to interpret subtle environmental cues such as wind shifts, animal absence, and changes in temperature. You feel this awareness as something almost instinctive, not thought through, but lived. A more interpretive archaeological idea suggests that repeated camp organization patterns indicate shared cultural memory of space, where certain areas were consistently used for fire, rest, and tool work across many generations. You notice how naturally these divisions appear, even without planning. The fire pulses faintly again as a small pocket of fuel catches briefly, then settles. You watch it closely. Fire here is never passive. It requires attention, even in silence. It is both fragile and dependable at the same time. Outside, the Ice Age world continues its slow movement. Snow shifts over uneven terrain, forming soft waves across the land. Ice formations compress and expand under subtle pressure. Rivers beneath frozen surfaces continue their hidden flow, shaping the land in ways that cannot be seen directly. A widely acknowledged reconstruction of prehistoric life suggests that cooperation was essential for survival, particularly in colder regions where resource scarcity demanded shared effort and mutual dependence. You see this reflected in the quiet coordination of your group, where actions are synchronized without need for instruction. A quieter academic viewpoint proposes that firelight environments may have served as emotional stabilizers, offering warmth, visibility, and a shared focal point that reduced stress in high-risk environments. You feel this stability now, even in silence, as the fire anchors your awareness. Occasionally, a distant sound breaks through the stillness. It might be ice shifting or wind passing through a narrow valley. It is impossible to know for certain. Uncertainty is a constant companion in this world. You shift slightly, feeling the ground beneath you. It is uneven, cold, and unchanged by time in any way you can perceive. Yet beneath that stillness, everything is slowly moving. The Ice Age is not truly fixed. It is transitioning, step by step, towards something different. A well-established anthropological understanding is that cultural knowledge in this era was transmitted primarily through imitation, repetition, and shared experience rather than formal teaching structures. You think about how every skill you have came not from instruction, but from watching, doing, and remembering. A more subtle insight from archaeological interpretation suggests that fire-centered gatherings may have contributed not only to survival, but also to the strengthening of group cohesion, creating a sense of shared presence in environments defined by uncertainty. You feel that cohesion now in the quiet shared space around you. The fire dims slightly once more, settling into a steady glow that feels smaller but more focused. The night continues without urgency, stretching forward without clear edges and somewhere beyond what you can see, the world continues its slow transformation. Even if it has not yet revealed what it is becoming, the fire has become quieter now, reduced to a soft cluster of glowing coals that barely push back the darkness beyond the shelter. You notice how the light no longer spreads far. Instead, it gathers close, as if the world itself is narrowing into this small space of warmth and breath. By this point in the late Ice Age, human environments are beginning to shift in subtle but meaningful ways. Glacial coverage still dominates the northern world, yet gradual warming trends are already influencing river flow, seasonal plant growth, and animal migration timing. These changes are slow, but they are real, and they are beginning to reshape survival patterns. A widely supported archaeological interpretation points to increasing specialization in stone tool production during this period, with smaller, more refined tools appearing in many sites across Eurasia. You imagine hands carefully shaping stone not just for strength, but for precision, adapting to new environmental demands. A lesser-known observation from excavation layers is that some toolkits appear intentionally curated, as if certain items were carried across long distances while others were left behind, suggesting early forms of selection based on need and efficiency. You look at the tools near the fire and see them not as objects, but as decisions made in stone. The air inside the shelter feels still, but not stagnant. It carries faint traces of smoke, animal hide, and cold air slipping in from outside. These overlapping scents form a kind of invisible layer of life, marking the space as both protected and exposed at the same time. You adjust your position slightly closer to the embers. The warmth is now minimal, but still present enough to matter. In this environment, even small amounts of heat can make the difference between rest and discomfort. Around you, the group remains in quiet states of partial rest. Some lie still, others remain seated with lowered heads. Sleep here is not a full surrender, it is a controlled pause, always balanced against the need for awareness. Outside, the Ice Age night continues without interruption. Wind moves steadily across frozen ground, shaping snow into thin ridges and soft patterns. The landscape is never truly static. It is always being rewritten by forces too slow to perceive in real time. A commonly accepted scientific reconstruction suggests that Ice Age human groups developed highly adaptive seasonal movement systems, allowing them to shift territories in response to resource availability. You feel this adaptability in the way your group never fully settles, always prepared for movement even in rest. A more nuanced archaeological insight suggests that repeated use of certain landscape corridors over generations may have created inherited knowledge systems tied to geography, where movement routes became culturally reinforced. You think about this as if the land itself has memory, passed quietly through time. The fire shifts slightly, a small collapse of glowing material followed by a brief, weak flare. You watch it with steady attention. Fire is not stable. It requires continuous care, even when everything else is still. Beyond the shelter, darkness stretches in every direction. Yet it is not empty. It is filled with unseen motion, with slow processes unfolding across vast distances. Ice compresses. Water shifts beneath frozen layers. Animals continue migrations shaped by instincts older than human awareness. A well-established academic view holds that cooperation was essential to survival in cold environments of the late Pleistocene, especially where food sources were unpredictable and widely dispersed. You sense this cooperation not as an idea, but as a lived condition, expressed through shared silence and shared space. A more interpretive line of research suggests that fire-centered gatherings may have functioned as emotional anchors in prehistoric life, providing stability, visibility, and a shared focal point that helped regulate group behavior in uncertain conditions. You feel that anchoring now in the quiet rhythm of breathing and embers. Occasionally, the wind shifts and presses lightly against the shelter walls. The structure responds with a soft rustle of materials. Everything here is temporary, built to adapt rather than endure. That impermanence is part of daily existence. You glance briefly toward the entrance. Outside, there is only darkness and slow movement. Inside, there is only faint light and stillness. The boundary between them feels thin, almost delicate, and somewhere within that quiet balance, you begin to sense that the world is not simply continuing as it always has. It is slowly adjusting, like something preparing itself for a different future. Still too distant to name, the fire has almost dissolved into a bed of glowing embers, scattered like small points of memory in the dark. You notice how each glow fades at its own pace, some lingering longer than others, as if reluctant to disappear completely. The shelter feels quieter now, and the Ice Age night outside seems even larger, pressing gently against the thin boundary of warmth you're still holding onto. In this late Ice Age world, human life continues to be shaped by shifting environments that are slowly transitioning out of full glacial dominance. Ice sheets still cover vast regions, but warmer intervals begin to appear with increasing frequency in some areas, altering local ecosystems in subtle but important ways. A well-established archaeological understanding highlights that during this period, human groups increasingly refined their hunting strategies, using coordinated movement and improved toolkits to track and intercept migrating herds. You imagine this not as a single technique, but as a shared language of survival practiced without words. A lesser-known detail from excavation evidence shows that certain sites contain unusually dense concentrations of animal remains, suggesting repeated seasonal use as processing or temporary gathering locations. You picture these places as quiet hubs of activity, now long silent, yet once full of motion and purpose. Inside the shelter, the air feels cooler as the fire weakens. You shift slightly, pulling the animal hide closer around your body. The texture is familiar now, softened by time and use. It carries the faint scent of smoke, earth, and the long journeys it has endured with you. Around you, the group remains in a suspended state between rest and alertness. No one fully lets go of awareness. Even stillness is active here. A slight movement, a subtle sound. Anything could signal change in the environment outside. The wind outside strengthens briefly, brushing against the shelter with a low, continuous pressure. It finds small gaps and passes through them before disappearing into the interior, leaving only a trace of coldness behind. A widely accepted scientific interpretation suggests that Ice Age humans relied heavily on cumulative environmental knowledge passed through observation rather than formal instruction, allowing survival skills to develop gradually across generations. You feel this in your own instincts, as if your understanding of the world has been shaped more by experience than explanation. A more interpretive archaeological idea proposes that repeated occupation of specific landscapes may have contributed to a deep cultural familiarity with geography, where certain valleys, rivers, and shelters became part of long-term collective memory. You sense this when you recognize paths without needing to question why they feel familiar. The embers shift slightly again, a soft collapse followed by a brief, fading glow. You watch it carefully, noticing how even small changes in the fire alter the atmosphere of the entire space. Fire is not background here. It is the center of perception. Outside, the Ice Age continues its slow, almost invisible transformation. Snowdrifts settle into uneven layers. Ice formations compress under their own weight. Beneath frozen surfaces, water continues to move in hidden channels that reshape the land over long periods of time. A commonly referenced academic view is that survival during this era depended on strong cooperative bonds within groups, where shared effort reduced risk and improved access to scarce resources. You feel that cooperation not as a theory, but as a quiet presence in the way everyone occupies the same space without conflict. A more reflective scholarly perspective suggests that firelight may have played a psychological role in stabilizing group dynamics, offering a consistent focal point that helped maintain calm in environments defined by uncertainty. You notice how your attention naturally returns to the embers again and again, as if drawn by something steady. Occasionally, a distant sound passes through the night. It might be wind moving through a valley or ice shifting under pressure. There is no way to confirm it, and that uncertainty is normal here. The world does not offer clarity unless it chooses to. You breathe slowly, feeling the cool air enter and leave your lungs. Time feels less like a sequence, and more like a continuous presence, stretching forward without clear edges. And in that quiet suspension, you begin to sense something subtle in the world beyond the shelter, as if the environment itself is slowly loosening its long-held stillness, preparing for changes that no one here can yet fully recognize. The embers are now barely more than faint red traces scattered across ash, like the last memory of a stronger flame. You notice how quickly warmth disappears once fire begins to fade in this environment. It does not linger, it retreats, almost politely, leaving the cold to return without resistance. In this late Ice Age setting, human survival is becoming increasingly tied to environmental unpredictability. While glaciers still dominate large regions, gradual warming trends are beginning to reshape coastlines, river systems, and seasonal vegetation cycles in ways that affect both animals and human movement patterns. A broadly supported archaeological interpretation suggests that humans of this period were highly skilled at adjusting their subsistence strategies based on seasonal availability, shifting between hunting, foraging, and opportunistic resource gathering depending on what the land provided. You picture this flexibility not as planning, but as constant adaptation in real time. A lesser discussed detail from excavation studies is that certain hearth sites show evidence of repeated cleaning and reuse over long intervals, indicating that groups may have returned to familiar locations across years or even generations. You look at the faint outline of your current fire spot and imagine it existing long before your arrival. Inside the shelter, the temperature drops slightly as the last warmth from the fire dissipates. You pull your hide closer, feeling its weight settle more firmly around your shoulders. It is no longer just clothing. It is insulation between your body and an environment that does not forgive exposure. Around you, the group is quieter now. Some have shifted into deeper rest, while others remain lightly aware, listening to the environment beyond the shelter walls. Even in stillness, there is readiness. That is the nature of life here, outside. Wind moves steadily across the frozen ground. It is not violent, but persistent, flowing across uneven terrain and carrying faint traces of distant ice fields. The sound it creates is subtle, almost like breathing on a larger scale. A widely accepted scientific reconstruction holds that Ice Age human groups developed extensive ecological knowledge systems based on long-term observation of animal behavior, plant cycles, and environmental cues, allowing them to anticipate seasonal changes without formal measurement tools. You experience this as an instinctive awareness of patterns rather than conscious analysis. A more nuanced archaeological perspective suggests that repeated occupation of specific regions may have created culturally embedded knowledge of geography, where certain landscapes were remembered not individually, but collectively across generations. You feel this when familiar terrain seems to hold meaning beyond immediate experience. The last glow of the fire flickers weakly, then steadies for a moment before fading further. You watch it carefully, as if it might reveal something in its final movement. Fire has always been both companion and necessity. and its decline always feels like a quiet shift in the entire atmosphere. Beyond the shelter, the Ice Age world continues its slow and patient motion. Snow accumulates in uneven patterns shaped by wind. Ice layers compress and shift under pressure too gradual to see directly. Rivers beneath frozen surfaces continue their hidden flow, carving paths that will later define new landscapes. A commonly referenced academic understanding is that cooperation was essential for survival in this era, particularly in environments where resources were scattered and unpredictable, requiring shared knowledge and coordinated movement. You sense this cooperation in the silent presence of others around you, even without words. A more interpretive scholarly suggestion proposes that fire-centered spaces may have functioned as anchors for social cohesion, creating shared points of stability in environments where everything else was constantly changing. You notice how the fading fire still holds everyone together in its absence. Occasionally, a faint sound moves through the darkness outside. It could be shifting ice or distant wind. It does not matter which, because both belong to the same vast system of movement that defines this world. You remain still, listening to the quiet rhythm of the shelter, the slow breathing of others, and the final faint warmth still lingering in the air. Time here does not move forward in clear steps. It settles, expands, and fades. And somewhere beyond perception, the Ice Age continues its transformation, not suddenly, but steadily, as if the entire planet is learning a new way to exist, one breath at a time. The fire is now nothing more than a faint memory of heat, buried in ash with only occasional traces of red light flickering like a pulse that refuses to disappear completely. You notice how the darkness seems deeper without it, as if the shelter itself has expanded to fit the silence. In this transitional phase of the late Ice Age, environmental conditions are becoming increasingly dynamic. Glacial retreat is beginning in some regions, while other areas remain locked in persistent cold. This uneven transformation creates a mosaic of shifting habitats that directly influences human and animal movement patterns. A well-supported archaeological synthesis suggests that human groups were highly responsive to ecological variation, adjusting migration routes in alignment with changing animal populations and seasonal plant growth. You imagine this as a constant reading of the world, where survival depends on noticing what others might overlook. A lesser-known insight from excavation contexts reveals that some habitation layers contain mixed evidence of cold and warm climate species, indicating overlapping environmental phases within the same regions over time. You picture landscapes where ice and green space coexist in shifting balance, never fully stable. Inside the shelter, the remaining warmth has almost fully dissipated. The air feels sharper now, settling back into its natural cold state. You pull your clothing closer, noticing how quickly comfort disappears when fire is no longer actively maintained. Around you, the group is almost entirely still. Some have entered deeper rest, while others remain in a quiet, half-aware state, attuned to subtle changes in sound or temperature. Sleep here is never a complete surrender. It is always balanced with awareness. Outside, the wind moves in long, continuous flows across frozen terrain. It interacts with uneven ground, creating soft variations in pressure that can be felt more than heard. The landscape is shaped as much by movement as by stillness. A broadly accepted anthropological interpretation holds that Ice Age communities relied on long-term experiential learning, where survival skills were accumulated through observation and repetition rather than structured teaching systems. You feel this in the way knowledge seems to sit in your body rather than your thoughts. A more interpretive archaeological reading suggests that repeated returns to specific environmental zones may have contributed to a shared cultural geography, where places carried meaning not just as resources, but as remembered patterns of life. You sense this when familiar terrain feels instinctively recognizable even without explanation. The final remnants of embers fade further, leaving only darkened ash that still holds faint warmth beneath its surface. You watch it quietly, noticing how even absence can feel like a presence when it has been central for long enough. Beyond the shelter, the Ice Age continues its slow transformation. Ice sheets shift under their own immense weight. Rivers beneath frozen surfaces continue to carve unseen paths, and seasonal patterns gradually reorganize across vast distances. None of this is visible in the moment, but all of it is happening continuously. A commonly referenced scientific perspective emphasizes that survival in this era depended on cooperative social structures, where shared effort and mutual awareness increased resilience in unpredictable environments. You feel this in the silent coordination of bodies sharing the same small space. A more reflective academic perspective suggests that fire-centered gatherings may have served as psychological stabilizers, offering a consistent sensory anchor in an otherwise unstable world. Even now, with the fire nearly gone, its absence still shapes how the space feels. Occasionally, the wind carries a faint, undefined sound through the darkness outside. It could be shifting snow, distant ice movement, or something entirely ordinary. In this environment, certainty is rare, and interpretation is always partial. You remain still, listening to the layered silence. It is not empty. It is full of subtle signals, barely noticeable but constantly present. And as the night continues without interruption, you begin to sense that the world outside is no longer simply repeating itself. It is slowly, almost imperceptibly, moving towards something different, as if the Ice Age is loosening its grip one quiet moment at a time. The fire is gone now in everything except memory. Only a faint warmth remains buried beneath ash, like the echo of something that once felt alive and necessary. You notice how the shelter feels larger without the light, as if darkness expands to fill every empty space it can reach. In this late Ice Age world, environmental systems are beginning to show increasing variability. While large ice sheets still dominate northern regions, the planet is no longer locked in a single stable cold state. Instead, temperatures fluctuate in patterns that slowly reshape ecosystems over long stretches of time. A widely supported archaeological interpretation highlights that human groups during this period became highly proficient at tracking multi-seasonal animal migrations, adjusting movement routes with remarkable precision based on accumulated environmental knowledge. You imagine this as reading an invisible map drawn by the behavior of living things. A lesser-known detail emerging from site analysis is that certain regions show continuous human presence interrupted by long environmental gaps, suggesting that some areas were abandoned and later reused when conditions became favorable again. You picture land that breathes in and out of human presence across generations. Inside the shelter, cold air now dominates fully. Without the fire, the temperature drops quickly and you become more aware of every layer of clothing you're wearing. The animal hides feel heavier, not because they have changed, but because they are now the only barrier between your body and the surrounding environment. Around you, the group remains in a quiet state of rest. Some are asleep now, while others maintain a light awareness, their bodies still subtly oriented toward potential changes in sound or movement. Even rest is structured around survival here. Outside, the wind continues its steady passage across frozen terrain. It moves in broad, unseen currents, interacting with valleys, ridges, and open plains, shaping the surface of the land in ways that happen too slowly to observe directly. A commonly accepted scientific view suggests that Ice Age humans developed highly detailed ecological awareness through long-term observation, allowing them to anticipate environmental shifts such as seasonal transitions and animal movement patterns without formal measurement systems. You feel this awareness as something instinctive, almost physical. A more nuanced archaeological interpretation proposes that repeated occupation of certain landscapes contributed to a deep, culturally shared familiarity with geography, where knowledge of place was transmitted through movement and lived experience rather than formal teaching. You sense this in how certain directions feel naturally correct even in darkness. The ash where the fire once burned has cooled further. You reach toward it briefly, feeling only faint residual warmth that is already fading into the surrounding cold. The transition from warmth to absence feels sharper now, as if the environment is reclaiming the space the fire once held. Beyond the shelter, the Ice Age world continues its vast and gradual motion. Ice sheets shift under immense pressure. Rivers beneath frozen layers carve unseen pathways, and seasonal cycles slowly adjust across regions, separated by enormous distances. None of this is visible here, but all of it is active. A broadly recognized anthropological perspective emphasizes that survival in this era depended on strong cooperative networks, where shared knowledge and collective effort increased the likelihood of success in unpredictable environments. You feel that cooperation in the quiet presence of others sharing the same enclosed space. A more interpretive line of research suggests that firelight may have functioned as a stabilizing center for social interaction, creating a shared sensory environment that helped regulate behavior and reinforce group cohesion. Even now, its absence still shapes how the space feels organized and safe. Occasionally, a faint sound passes through the night outside. It might be wind moving through uneven terrain, or ice shifting under distant pressure. In this world, interpretation is always uncertain, and certainty is rarely available. You breathe slowly, noticing how your body adapts to the cold in small incremental ways. Stillness becomes a kind of endurance. Awareness becomes a kind of protection. And as the night stretches forward without visible change, you begin to feel the subtle truth of this era. Nothing is truly fixed. Not the land, not the climate, not even the long cold world itself. Everything is slowly moving, even when it appears completely still. The shelter is now fully immersed in darkness, the kind that feels complete rather than empty. Without firelight, shapes lose their edges, and everything becomes softer, more uncertain. You can still sense the presence of others nearby, but vision no longer helps much here. Sound and breath become more important than sight. In this late Ice Age phase, environments across much of the Northern Hemisphere are undergoing slow but meaningful transformation. Glacial systems remain extensive, yet the gradual warming trend continues to influence river paths, vegetation zones, and animal migration timing in ways that accumulate over long periods. A widely supported archaeological reconstruction suggests that human groups increasingly relied on flexible seasonal mobility systems, adjusting movement patterns in response to shifting ecological opportunities rather than fixed territorial boundaries. You imagine this as a constant negotiation between people and landscape, shaped by necessity rather than choice. A lesser discussed observation from excavation records shows that some regions contain overlapping occupation layers from different climatic phases, indicating that humans repeatedly return to the same areas across dramatically changing environmental conditions. You picture these places as silent witnesses to many versions of the same world. Inside the shelter, the cold has settled fully. It is no longer a temporary discomfort but a stable presence. You pull your hides closer, feeling how they trap a small pocket of warmth around your body. That small pocket becomes your entire sense of safety. Around you, the group remains quiet. Some are asleep now, breathing slowly and evenly. Others remain partially awake, their awareness tuned to the subtle rhythm of the environment. Even in rest, survival is never fully paused. Outside, as wind continues its slow movement across the Ice Age landscape, it flows over uneven terrain, shaping snow into soft ridges and carrying cold air through valleys and open plains. The world outside is active in ways that are not immediately visible. A commonly accepted scientific perspective holds that Ice Age humans developed advanced observational intelligence through long-term engagement with environmental cycles, enabling them to respond effectively to seasonal and climatic variability without formalized systems of record-keeping. You feel this intelligence as something embedded in instinct rather than thought. A more interpretive archaeological suggestion proposes that repeated use of specific landscapes over generations contributed to a shared cultural geography, where memory of place was preserved through movement and lived experience rather than language. You sense this in how certain directions or routes feel naturally familiar even in darkness. The ash where the fire once existed is now fully cool. There is no warmth left in it, only residue. You do not need to see it to know it is there. Its presence is defined by what is missing. Beyond the shelter, the Ice Age world continues its vast, slow transformation. Ice sheets shift under immense weight. River systems beneath frozen layers continue to carve unseen paths, and ecosystems adjust gradually to changing temperature patterns. None of this is perceptible in a single moment, but all of it is constantly unfolding. A broadly recognized anthropological view emphasizes that cooperation was essential for survival in this era, particularly in environments where resources were scattered and unpredictable, requiring shared effort and coordinated movement. You feel this cooperation in the quiet stability of shared space, even without communication. A more reflective scholarly interpretation suggests that fire-centered spaces may have functioned as psychological anchors, providing stability, orientation, and emotional grounding in environments defined by uncertainty. Now that the fire is gone, its absence is still felt as a structure that once organized the space. Occasionally, a faint sound moves through the darkness outside. It could be wind shifting across frozen ground or distant ice movement responding to pressure. The source does not matter as much as the reminder that the world outside is never fully still. You remain motionless, listening to the layered silence around you. It is dense, structured, and alive in its own way. Even without light, the world continues to communicate through subtle signals. And as this long Ice Age night continues without interruption, you begin to feel something quietly growing beneath it all. The sense that nothing here is permanent, not even the cold that once seemed endless. Everything is already in motion, slowly changing even when it appears completely still. The darkness inside the shelter has now settled into something almost tactile, as if it has thickness and texture. You no longer feel like you're inside a space with boundaries. Instead, it feels like you're suspended inside the night itself, with only the faint presence of others nearby reminding you that you're not alone. In this transitional Ice Age environment, ecological conditions are becoming increasingly uneven across regions. Some areas remain locked in persistent cold, while others begin to experience more frequent seasonal thawing, gradually altering the balance between ice, water, and vegetation over long spans of time. A well-established archaeological synthesis points to increasing regional specialization in subsistence strategies, where different human groups adapted distinct survival patterns depending on local resources and environmental stability. You imagine these variations as invisible cultures shaped by the land itself. A lesser-known insight drawn from excavation sequences shows that certain animal remains appear in shifting proportions over time within the same sites, suggesting gradual changes in hunting focus as ecosystems evolved. You picture these shifts not as sudden decisions, but as slow adjustments made through lived experience. Inside the shelter, the cold is now fully dominant. Without fire, warmth exists only in layers of clothing and body proximity. You become more aware of your own breathing, each inhale and exhale marking a small rhythm against the surrounding stillness. Around you, the group is almost completely quiet. Sleep has taken hold for some, while others remain lightly alert. Even in rest, there is a shared understanding that the environment demands readiness at all times. Outside, the wind continues its long passage across frozen land. It moves without urgency, shaping the surface of snow into subtle patterns and carrying cold air through uneven terrain. The Ice Age world is never truly still, even when it appears silent. A broadly accepted scientific interpretation emphasizes that human survival during this period depended on highly flexible ecological knowledge systems, developed through long-term interaction with seasonal cycles, animal behavior, and environmental change. You feel this knowledge not as information, but as instinct built through repetition. A more interpretive archaeological perspective suggests that repeated habitation of certain geographic zones may have created culturally reinforced landscapes, where memory of place was shared collectively and passed through movement rather than language. You experience this in the way certain directions feel familiar even in total darkness. The remains of the fire are now indistinguishable from the surrounding ground. What once was a source of warmth is now only ashen cooling stone. Yet even its absence continues to shape how the space feels organized. Beyond the shelter, the Ice Age world continues its slow transformation. Ice sheets shift under immense structural pressure. River systems beneath frozen surfaces continue carving unseen channels, and ecosystems adjust gradually to long-term climate variation. These processes are invisible in the moment but constant in motion. A widely supported anthropological view holds that cooperation within Ice Age groups was essential for survival, particularly in environments where resources were unevenly distributed and required coordinated movement and shared knowledge. You feel this cooperation in the quiet stability of shared presence. A more reflective line of research proposes that fire-centered environments may have served as psychological anchors, offering sensory stability and reinforcing group cohesion in otherwise unpredictable surroundings. Even without the fire, its influence still lingers in how the space feels structured. Occasionally, a faint disturbance moves through the night outside. It could be shifting snow, distant ice movement, or wind passing through uneven terrain. In this environment, certainty is never complete, and interpretation always remains partial. You remain still, aware of the subtle sounds around you, the rhythm of breathing, and the deep silence that surrounds everything else. Time feels less like something that passes and more like something you exist within. And somewhere beyond perception, the Ice Age continues its quiet transition, not in sudden change, but in gradual adjustment, as if the entire planet is slowly learning a new rhythm it has not yet fully revealed. The shelter feels different now, not because anything new has appeared, but because everything familiar has shifted into deeper silence. Without fire, even memory of warmth becomes abstract, like something remembered through touch rather than sensation. You sit in the dark and slowly become aware of how sound replaces sight in this world. During this later phase of the Ice Age, environmental systems across continents continue to reorganize themselves in uneven ways. Some regions experience gradual warming trends that encourage vegetation expansion, while others remain locked in persistent glacial conditions, creating a fragmented and constantly changing ecological map. A widely supported archaeological interpretation indicates that human groups developed increasingly complex mobility networks, allowing them to navigate large territories by following seasonal resource availability and long-established migration corridors. You imagine this as movement guided not by maps, but by memory and observation layered over generations. A lesser-known observation from excavation data reveals that certain stone tool assemblages show signs of repeated refinement over time, suggesting continuous improvement in technique rather than abrupt technological change. You picture hands slowly perfecting shape and function across countless quiet moments. Inside the shelter, your senses adjust to the absence of light. You become more aware of temperature gradients, airflow, and the subtle presence of others. Even silence has structure here. It is not empty, but layered, around you. Some members of the group are fully asleep now, their breathing slow and steady. Others remain lightly awake, maintaining a quiet awareness of their surroundings. This shared state of partial rest reflects a constant balance between vulnerability and survival. Outside, wind continues its long movement across frozen terrain. It flows through valleys and over ridges, carrying fine particles of snow that shift and settle in slow patterns. The Ice Age landscape is shaped continuously by these invisible forces. A broadly accepted scientific reconstruction suggests that Ice Age humans possessed highly developed environmental perception, allowing them to interpret subtle changes in animal movement, vegetation patterns, and atmospheric conditions without formal measurement systems. You experience this as an awareness that feels immediate rather than learned. A more interpretive archaeological perspective proposes that repeated occupation of specific regions created culturally reinforced landscapes, where knowledge of place accumulated through shared experience across generations. You sense this in how certain spatial directions feel familiar even in complete darkness. The remains of the fire are now fully inert. Only cooled ash and faintly darkened earth remain. Yet even without light or heat, its presence still defines the center of the space, as if absence itself has structure. Beyond the shelter, the Ice Age world continues its slow, continuous transformation. Ice sheets shift under immense weight, rivers beneath frozen layers carve unseen paths, and ecosystems adjust gradually to long-term climatic variation. These processes remain invisible in any single moment, yet they are always active. A widely recognized anthropological view emphasizes that cooperation within Ice Age communities was essential for survival in environments where resources were scattered and unpredictable, requiring coordination, trust, and shared knowledge. You feel this cooperation in the quiet stillness of shared presence. A more reflective scholarly interpretation suggests that fire-centered spaces may have functioned as cognitive and emotional anchors, helping structure social interaction and stabilize group awareness in environments defined by uncertainty. Now that the fire is gone, its absence still shapes how the space is experienced. Occasionally, a faint sound moves through the darkness outside. It might be shifting snow or distant ice responding to pressure changes. In this world, certainty is rare, and perception is always incomplete. You remain still, listening to the layered quiet around you. Breathing becomes the most consistent rhythm, steady and grounding in the absence of light. Time feels less like progression and more like immersion, and as the night continues without interruption, the world outside carries on its slow transformation, as if the entire planet is gradually adjusting to a new balance that has not yet fully revealed itself. The darkness has now fully settled into the shelter, not as something separate from you, but as something you are partially inside. Without fire, without visible shape, the world becomes defined by distance, sound, and the slow awareness of your own body breathing in and out. In this later Ice Age stage, environmental change continues its gradual unfolding across vast regions. Ice sheets still persist in many northern zones, but their edges begin to fluctuate more noticeably over long periods. Meanwhile, warmer intervals influence rainfall patterns, river systems, and the distribution of vegetation in subtle but cumulative ways. A well-supported archaeological interpretation suggests that human groups increasingly structured their movement around overlapping ecological zones, where different resources became available at different times of year, requiring flexible and highly responsive mobility strategies. You imagine this as a constant recalibration of direction based on what the land offers. A lesser-known detail from excavation research indicates that some habitation sites contain repeated microlayers of occupation separated by short environmental gaps, implying frequent returns to the same locations under shifting conditions. You picture these places as quiet anchors in a moving world. Inside the shelter, your awareness becomes sharper in the absence of sight. You notice temperature differences across your skin, the faint movement of air near the entrance, and the subtle presence of others resting nearby. Darkness does not erase perception, it rearranges it. Around you, some individuals are fully asleep now, while others remain in a shallow state of alertness. The boundary between rest and awareness is fluid here, shaped by habit rather than schedule. Survival does not allow complete disengagement from the environment. Outside, wind continues its long passage across frozen terrain. It moves steadily over uneven ground, carrying snow grains that shift and settle in slow patterns. The landscape is not still, even when it appears so. It is always in motion at a scale that resists immediate perception. A broadly accepted scientific reconstruction holds that Ice Age humans developed highly refined environmental sensitivity, allowing them to detect early seasonal transitions and subtle shifts in animal behavior through long-term observation and lived experience. You feel this sensitivity as an instinct that does not require thought. A more interpretive archaeological view suggests that repeated human presence across specific geographic corridors created shared cultural landscapes, where knowledge of terrain accumulated collectively over generations. You sense this in the way certain directions feel naturally correct even without visibility. The remains of the fire are now completely inert. Only ash and cooled fragments of charcoal remain, indistinguishable at times from the surrounding ground. Yet its absence still shapes the centre of the shelter, as if the space remembers what once defined it. Beyond the shelter, the Ice Age world continues its slow and persistent transformation. Ice sheets shift under immense pressure. River systems beneath frozen surfaces continue carving hidden pathways, and ecosystems adjust gradually to long-term climate fluctuations. None of this is visible in the moment, yet all of it is continuously unfolding. A widely recognized anthropological perspective emphasizes that cooperation was essential to survival during this period, particularly in environments where resources were uneven and required coordinated movement and shared knowledge. You feel this cooperation in the silent presence of others sharing the same confined space. A more reflective scholarly interpretation proposes that fire-centered environments may have served as psychological and social anchors, helping regulate group cohesion and providing stability in otherwise unpredictable surroundings. Even in its absence, a memory of fire still organizes how the space is experienced. Occasionally, a faint sound moves through the night outside. It could be wind passing over frozen ridges or ice shifting under distant pressure. In this world, interpretation is always uncertain and rarely complete. You remain still, listening to the layered silence that surrounds everything. It is not empty. It is structured, full of subtle signals and rhythms that exist just beyond clear perception. And as the long night continues, you begin to feel that the world outside is not simply enduring, but slowly changing its internal balance, as if the Ice Age itself is quietly loosening its hold on what comes next. The shelter is now defined only by touch and sound. Without fire, without visible form, space becomes something you feel rather than see. The cold is steady, not sharp, but continuous, like a slow pressure that surrounds everything equally. In this final stretch of the Ice Age's long transition, global climate systems are increasingly in motion. Glacial boundaries shift over centuries, not days, but their gradual retreat begins to reshape coastlines, river valleys, and vegetation belts in ways that accumulate into large-scale transformation. A widely supported archaeological synthesis indicates that human populations of this era were highly adaptive, often reorganizing settlement patterns in response to shifting resource zones and seasonal availability. You imagine this as a constant negotiation between people and landscape, where survival depends on movement rather than permanence. A lesser-known insight from excavation sequences shows that certain regions exhibit continuity of tool traditions across long-time spans, suggesting that knowledge was preserved even as environments changed dramatically. You picture this continuity as invisible threads connecting generations across shifting terrain. Inside the shelter, your senses adjust further to darkness. Sound becomes sharper, breathing, cloth movement, and faint shifts in posture all become more noticeable. The absence of light does not reduce awareness, it refines it around you. The group exists in quiet equilibrium. Some are fully asleep, others remain lightly aware, maintaining a subtle vigilance that never fully disappears. This shared state reflects a long-learned balance between rest and survival readiness. Outside, wind continues to move across frozen ground in slow, persistent currents. It passes over uneven terrain, shaping snow into layered formations that accumulate gradually over time. The Ice Age landscape is constantly being rewritten, even when it appears unchanged. A broadly accepted scientific interpretation suggests that Ice Age humans developed deep ecological intelligence through continuous exposure to environmental variability, enabling them to interpret seasonal transitions and resource fluctuations without formal systems of measurement. You feel this intelligence as something instinctive, embedded in lived experience. A more interpretive archaeological perspective proposes that repeated occupation of familiar geographic regions contributed to a collective spatial memory, where knowledge of place was shared and reinforced through repeated movement over generations. You sense this in the way certain directional awareness feels natural even in total darkness. The remains of the fire are now fully absorbed into the ground, indistinguishable from surrounding earth. Yet its absence still defines the center of the shelter, as if space itself has retained the structure of what once existed there. Beyond the shelter, the Ice Age world continues its slow transformation. Ice sheets adjust under immense weight. River systems beneath frozen surfaces continue carving hidden channels, and ecosystems gradually respond to long-term climatic shifts. These processes are invisible in any single moment, but constant over time. A widely recognized anthropological view emphasizes that cooperation within Ice Age groups was essential for survival, particularly in environments where resources were widely dispersed and unpredictable, requiring coordinated movement and shared knowledge. You feel this cooperation in the silent stability of shared presence. A more reflective scholarly interpretation suggests that fire-centered spaces may have functioned as cognitive and social stabilizers, offering a consistent point of focus in environments defined by uncertainty. Even now, the absence of fire continues to structure how the space feels organized. Occasionally, a faint sound passes through the darkness outside. It might be wind moving through distant valleys or ice shifting under slow geological pressure. In this environment, certainty remains partial at best. You remain still, aware of the layered quiet surrounding you. Time no longer feels segmented, it feels continuous, like a current passing through everything without interruption. And as this long Ice Age night continues, there is a growing sense that the world outside is not static at all, but slowly adjusting its rhythm, as if preparing for a future that has not yet fully taken shape. The shelter feels almost weightless now, as if it has dissolved into the surrounding night and only your awareness is holding it together, without fire, without sight. Even the idea of space becomes uncertain. You're no longer simply inside a shelter. You are inside a shared silence shaped by breath, cold air, and the slow rhythm of survival. In the final phase of this Ice Age transition, Environmental systems are continuing their long adjustment toward a warmer and more stable global pattern. Ice sheets that once dominated entire continents are gradually retreating in some regions, opening new land corridors, altering hydrology, and reshaping ecosystems over centuries. A widely supported archaeological synthesis indicates that human populations during this period increasingly diversified their subsistence strategies, combining hunting, foraging, and early forms of resource management depending on local environmental conditions. You imagine this as a world where survival becomes increasingly flexible, shaped by constant reading of shifting landscapes. A lesser-known insight from excavation layers suggests that some regions show uninterrupted sequences of human presence across major climatic transitions, implying remarkable continuity of occupation and adaptation, even as surrounding environments change significantly. You picture generations passing through the same spaces, each one facing a slightly different world. Inside the shelter, awareness has become finely tuned. You notice the smallest sounds, a shift of fabric, a quiet breath, the faint movement of someone adjusting position. Darkness no longer feels like absence, it feels like depth around you. Some are fully asleep now, while others remain lightly conscious, suspended between rest and alertness. This fragile balance reflects a long-evolved response to environments where unpredictability is constant. Outside, wind continues its slow movement across frozen ground. It shapes snow into layered patterns and carries cold air through valleys that stretch far beyond perception. Even in stillness, the Ice Age world is never truly still. A broadly accepted scientific interpretation holds that Ice Age humans developed highly refined ecological awareness through long-term immersion in variable environments, allowing them to anticipate seasonal change through observation rather than formal measurement. You feel this awareness as something that exists beneath thought, almost like instinct. A more interpretive archaeological perspective proposes that repeated movement across familiar landscapes created shared cognitive maps, where geography was remembered collectively and transmitted through lived experience rather than language alone. You sense this in the way certain directions feel familiar even without visibility. The place where the fire once existed is now fully absorbed into darkness. No warmth remains, only the faint imprint of its past presence in the way the space still feels centered around it. Beyond the shelter, the Ice Age continues its slow, patient transformation. Ice sheets shift under immense weight. River systems beneath frozen layers carve unseen pathways, and ecosystems gradually reorganize in response to long-term climatic change. These processes remain invisible moment to moment, yet constant across time. A widely recognized anthropological view emphasizes that cooperation was essential for survival in this era, particularly in environments where resources were widely scattered and required coordinated movement, shared knowledge, and mutual dependence. You feel this cooperation in the quiet stability of shared presence. A more reflective scholarly interpretation suggests that fire-centered gatherings may have functioned as emotional and cognitive anchors, providing structure and cohesion in environments defined by uncertainty. Even in its absence, the memory of fire still shapes how the space is experienced. Occasionally, a faint sound moves through the night outside, indistinct and untraceable. It could be wind, ice, or distant shifting terrain. In this world, clarity is never complete. You remain still, listening to the layered quiet that surrounds everything. It is not empty. It is full of subtle continuity, a reminder that even darkness has structure. And as the Ice Age night continues without interruption, there is a final quiet realization that nothing here has ever been truly fixed. Not the land, not the climate, and not even this long frozen world itself. Everything has always been moving, slowly, toward something new. Sweet dreams.